As a young student with Gamel, I'd really just begun to seriously read what painters had to say. And I ran into an interesting comment by Ang. He said, unless you have the concept of the thing fixed in your mind and eye, you'll just be pushing shapes around all day long. It was such an intriguing notion. It sounded like it was just fraught with really important stuff. And I really couldn't make hardly anything out of it. So I let it sit there in my brain and wondered about it and kept wondering, kept letting it sit there. But I'm finding today that there may be a greater need, now that I understand the use of the word and understand the critical nature of the thing, that among students today there is probably a pretty critical need to have heard those words and to have considered what they mean. And so I thought you might just be interested in a little conversation in that direction. So I think that quote was from Walter Pach, P-A-C-H, and there were a number of books like that. That was a sort of a biography, but it was really reasonably good in the selection of quotes. There are a number of books like that, by the way. Julia Cartwright's Melee has such excellent quotes in it quotes that are good for painters to have heard. And but yeah, be sure to do your reading. But then begin to wonder what in the world these things mean. Here's Ang talking again. I'll put them on the board in front of us. In consulting the model, observe the relationships of the sizes. Now, of course, you know that's seeing. This is what constitutes its character. Oh, the relationships of the sizes, that's what constitutes its character. He didn't say the sizes, he said the relationships of the sizes. Isn't that interesting? So the seeing part, huh? We've heard that definition more than once. Now, I'm going to start over again. In consulting the model, observe the relationships of the sizes. This is what constitutes its character. Obtain a vivid impression of these size relationships and render them vividly. If instead you hesitate and start pushing them around the paper, you'll achieve nothing worthwhile. You must have the whole figure you want to draw in your mind and eye. The execution should be merely the preconceived image held in your mind. And then again, he says at a different time, now this will be the third quote, right? I've already given you one. And I have to find the other precise quote because it's more specific. They're all just slightly different, right? But he says, have in its entirety, in your soul and in your eyes, the figure that you wish to represent. And let the execution be only the realization of this possessed and preconceived image. So, possessed and preconceived. So, I thought the very idea of concepts and drawing from concepts ought to be more widely known, and I thought it'd be something worth your hearing a little bit about. I've had a number of people just lately in my workshops, of various workshops, in which they want to work right on top of their drawing like this and go back and forth and transfer data into their drawing like this. And it's an interesting phenomena of the day, But how is that different? I mean, do you need to preconceive anything when you're doing that? You're transferring data, you're transferring middle tones. I call it transferring dirt. You're just taking the darks out of nature and plugging them into, I mean, I don't mean to be facetious, but that's different, isn't it? I mean, you sense that that's different from actually, I mean, if you don't have to have an idea fixed in your mind and eye, and this is exactly what Ang says, have an idea fixed in your mind and eye, a concept of the thing. Well, if you're just doing this, do you need that concept? Well, maybe you do, but the fact is that a painting if you stand at the right distance from your painting, you're going to know that there's a whole bunch of bigger things than that. For example, the painting in its entirety. Now, if you're painting as an impressionist, you're painting from nature, which is the most fundamental first thing you learn to do, right? And so your first job is to be able to take in the thing as a whole, right? And that's what Ang says. You have to have a preconceived idea of the thing as a whole. You'll never get a preconceived idea like this. So what you got to watch out for, I find with students, I warn you that you mustn't find a method that doesn't encourage the use of the brain. you have to have an idea. You have to have a preconceived idea. So you have to look. And now Paxson would say you have to look 4 times for every time you make a mark. So why would you be doing that? You know why you'd be doing it, right? It's because you have to have an idea. You have to own something in your mind. You have to possess something in your mind. Sargent says, draw the longest line that you can. Now he's talking paint. But draw the longest line that you can. Well, what is that? Well, it's a preconceived, memorized, if you like, line. So running down the edge of an arm and down through the elbow and over, maybe that much. Whatever is the length of a line that you should hold in your eye at once, right? You have to have preconceived. So to be able to work this way, and by the way, this is the kind of thing that's required for you to paint impressionistically, and I mean in that highest possible sense of that word. So if you can just get over the idea, we mean broken color and bad drawing. This requires a good deal more than that. Draftsmanship requires that you have a capacity to preconceive form ideas, for example. You have to preconceive the form in your mind. So are you practicing doing that, I might ask, right? So, so we go from the idea that you keep try to get past the idea as merely a mechanical process and get to the idea that you have to, and now I'm using the word idea twice, but get to the place where you realize, where you know what the idea is that you're trying to put down. What is that you've seen, that you have prepossessed in your eye? And if you're not hanging on to something, when you walk forward, you're not doing it, right? If you're just applying mechanical processes, cha-chunk, 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 and especially, by the way, and I talk about this in relation to sight size, but sight size is when you start doing it per color, right? So you think you can just take this color from nature and put it onto your canvas, and take this color and put it onto your canvas, and everything will come out okay. But of course, you know better if you paint it just for a few minutes, so to speak. So then what must you do, right? You have to see a color to another color and learn a relationship, right? So there it is again, exactly what Ang is saying, right? In consulting the model, observe the relationships, right? And that's what you're supposed to preconceive. That's the character of the color. It's what they're doing in relation to each other. So that's what you want to try to preconceive. Take a hold of this, get a grasp of it, but know exactly why you're there. I had a student who had been with me a fairly long time, and I said to him, hey, do you know exactly what you're going up there to do? I stopped him in mid-stride, and I said, what are you going up there to do? And I said, can you tell me in words what you're going up there to do? Or do you have a picture of it? Yeah, he did not. He didn't actually know what I meant. And the way we work, though, you have to know what it is. You have to own a concept. You have to see something in relation to something else. You have to have an idea fixed in your mind and eye before you ever start walking forward. That way, when you get there, you can go up there and say, pre-picturing it, you can then put it down as you pre-picture it, and then you can walk back and check your results. And you're done if you succeeded at doing that thing. And by the way, that's the sort of the way we talk about the back-straggler, that thing that's least like, right? So you're looking at the thing as a whole, and you see there's something funny over here, and you finally realize it's actually a shape problem. Then you have to learn the shape. You have to sort of pop up the shape window and say, okay, in relation to what? In relation to what, right? And that's the shape discussion. So once you've seen something in relation to something, you have a concept, okay? Now that's a concept that's transferable. I like the discussion of transferable because that's the 5th floor that Degas talks about. Gamow would say that he was being hyperbolic when he said he'd make a studio on the 5th floor. Is hyperbolic the right word? Indulging in hyperbole. But he said he had models on the 1st floor. He'd have the most advanced students on the 5th floor, and the idea of the farthest away from the model. But suppose you're actually supposed to be working from the model. How would you do that, right? And the only way you could possibly do it is to have a much greater memory and a capacity to own ideas, like ideas about relationships, right? But it's obviously a different model from the transference model that Degas so rejected. His idea, he says, this guy Herman, have you seen this guy? He's got his students lined up side by side with their paintings. Doesn't he know this is an art of relation? So if you put those two together, it's an art of relation, and here's the 5th floor, the model's on the 1st floor. We can carry relationships up to the top floor. We just can't carry sight size up there, right? So interesting stuff, right? But yeah, find ways to do that. Get a mental picture of it. Try to pre-picture it as if it were already painted. That area you're working on. Try to pre-picture the whole painting as if it were already painted. Try to get some grasp of it. You don't have to, it's not a literal photograph. Somebody would say that you have to have a literal image of it in your mind. You don't. You have to have, much like, I think I've said before, much like when you have met someone and you would like to remember them, you actually will look at them in a way that has that in mind, is almost projected into the future. Like, will I remember them when I see them in the future? And there's a certain sort of ownership that takes place when you think that way. And that's rather the thing you need to do when you look at a figure standing before you. That complexity of that figure, I mean, what is that, But you have to look until, and that, that 4 times of looking until you say, I think I'll recognize you when I see you. This reminds me of my dad, actually, when he got Alzheimer's. It was sad for us, but in some days it was entertaining. I remember the first time I came in the room and the first time that he had it, I wasn't even aware of what it meant. Nobody explained anything to me. But I walked into the room to say hello to him, and he was sitting there with this big smile on his face, and he pointed his finger at that guy to me, and he said, I think I know that guy. And he had this nice smile on his face. It's a little more than that, I guess. But you won't have that idea. I think I know that. I think I have an idea of it. I have a concept of it, right? And this has to do with every aspect of painting. As I said, it has to do with color schemes. It has to do with the distribution of spots. It has to do with the edge relationships. It has to do with light effects and how they relate to each other, and the order of effects. And just so many, just everything, right? So, and of course, with a good impressionist, you're doing all these things all at once. So, I was checking my time here. I want to not be running over incredibly far today. Yeah. So the concept of the thing, pre-visualizing. One thing I would mention to you, and that is that this does require mental work, maybe the kind of mental work you've never done before. You can't be on automatic pilot doing this. You have to be fully there. There's a funny expression Gamble used to say, you have to be out of your mind to be a painter. And I was reading along eventually, and I was reading Rembrandt, or rather Millet, talking about Rembrandt. And Rembrandt said, he claimed Millet claimed that Rembrandt said, when I stopped thinking, I stopped painting. Well, that's more like, in a sense, what we're talking about now, right? You have to be both, by the way. You have to be out of your mind. You have to be in your eyes. But when you stop thinking, I say, when you stop preconceiving, you stop doing the work, the mental work of a painter, you're not in the same world. So notice which world you're in. Notice if you're just in this bland world of mechanical process and you're just this sort of the transference machine, that splashes the stuff over there, or are you the guy, are you actually the mind, and you want to be the mind, because eventually what that mind discovers in this looking process, especially relational looking, it begins to find the music. And that's when you become a solely invested, you know what I mean? I mean, really internally invested. And at that point, what's happening is you're beginning to bring down, and what they say is incarnate the real music. You're trying to bring into the flesh the real music. So, yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. But I maybe I'd dedicate this to Jazz. I had a chat with him last night, and it's odd that I've run through this lecture. To myself. On video, I've screwed this up twice now. This is my 3rd try at it. So, but it was your chat last night, Jazz, that got me to want to really focus and do this again. So, all right, thank you all. Comment, share, like, and see you next time.